2015 Chipotle has been on a roller coaster. Business plummeted following a series of foodborne illness outbreaks.
What's disgusting? Union busting! What's disgusting?
The workers think they have figured out what made nearly 647 people sick at an Ohio Chipotle. Food temperature.
Since 2008, Chipotle has had 10 scandals regarding food poisoning, which has affected thousands of people, spreading diseases like hepatitis A, norovirus, E. coli, salmonella, and Clostridium perfringens. And those are just the outbreaks that made it to the news. Many of you probably know people who are food poisoned after eating at Chipotle, or maybe it even happened to you. Yet, despite all these red flags, Chipotle is doing better than ever. In the last 12-month period, Chipotle brought in $8.4 billion in revenue and ended up profiting at $800 million. Similarly, they've expanded to over 3,000 locations across the US. And it's not just their fundamentals that have been doing well either. Chipotle stock has also held up extraordinarily well throughout the recession, being down only a mere 20%. This pegs Chipotle's valuation at $41 billion, which nearly makes them a top 10 food brand in terms of market cap. For perspective, that's over 3 times larger than Domino's Pizza. Given their popularity, you would think that addressing their food poisoning concerns would be their top priority, and according to their PR, it is. But when we look at the facts, they don't look nearly as favorable for Chipotle. In fact, it actually looks like they're regressing, given that their outbreaks tend to affect more people today. For example, their first outbreak in 2008 affected 22 customers. Conversely, an outbreak in 2018 ended up affecting 700 people. At first glance, you might think that this is somewhat expected for a chain as large as Chipotle. When you're serving that much food, you're bound to serve some that gets people sick. But this is actually not true. McDonald's, for example, has over 10 times the number of locations all over the world. Yet, their Wikipedia page only mentions the word outbreak once, and even that was in the context of describing the coronavirus outbreak. Conversely, Chipotle's Wikipedia page mentions the word outbreak a whopping 91 times. What makes this even more confusing is that Chipotle uses much of the same food supply chain as McDonald's. So what in the world is going on at Chipotle? And why do so many people choose to eat there anyway? To understand what's going wrong at Chipotle, we first have to take a look at their origin, because there was a point in time when Chipotle wasn't synonymous with food poisoning. Granted, it's been quite some time. The story of Chipotle dates back to 1993 to a man named Steve Ells. Steve was a classically trained chef who had a few years of experience working in the traditional restaurant industry as a sous chef. While this gig gave Steve some experience, he knew from day one that he wanted to open a fine dining restaurant. Jumping to that from just being a sous chef was quite a leap though. So at age 28, Steve borrowed $85,000 from his friends and family and opened a small burrito shop instead in Denver, Colorado. Initially, he estimated that he needed to sell at least 107 burritos per day to be profitable, but he ended up crushing this number. By the end of the first month itself, Steve was selling over 1,000 burritos per day. This strong reception gave Steve the confidence to take out an SBA loan and open additional restaurants in Colorado. We can't give Steve all the credit though, as he had substantial help from his father. You see, Steve's father was a wealthy pharmaceutical executive, and while he was hesitant to invest at ground zero, once he saw these results, he became a mass investor, putting in $1.5 million. Despite having access to all this capital, Steve was in no rush to open up a bunch of restaurants or expand outside of the state for 2 reasons. For one, Steve strongly believed in keeping the business simple and straightforward. And this is very much a core principle of Chipotle to this day. I mean, this is basically their entire menu. And 2, turning Chipotle into a nationwide giant was never Steve's vision. His goal was to simply get some experience running Chipotle before switching over to fine dining. But by 1998, it was becoming extremely difficult to stick to this original vision, simply due to how well Chipotle was doing. Instead of resisting it, Steve would simply embrace the change and go all in on Chipotle, opening their first restaurant outside of Colorado in 1998. Now that Chipotle was no longer just a local sensation, bigger investors would become interested, particularly McDonald's. McDonald's started off with a small stake, but they would end up making Chipotle into who they are today. Over the next 7 years, McDonald's helped Chipotle grow from 16 locations to over 500 locations by investing a whopping $360 million, which gave them a 90% stake in the company. But money wasn't even the biggest asset that McDonald's brought to the table. Their primary contribution was, of course, their experience. While McDonald's gets a bad rep for selling highly processed junk food, one thing you can't argue with is that they're exceptional at selling said food. They've honed in everything from marketing and franchising to the supply chain and food safety. And this expertise was very much evident in Chipotle's flawless growth from 16 stores to 500 stores. But unfortunately for Chipotle, McDonald's would not stick around forever. While McDonald's was crushing it with Chipotle, the same could not be said about their own business. During the dot-com crash, McDonald's stock would sell off 75%, and it would take them 8 years to return to their former highs. While much of this was simply due to the state of the economy, McDonald's executives decided that they had to stop spending so much effort on relatively small investments like Chipotle and instead focus on their own growth. So, in 2006, they decided to take Chipotle public and sell off their entire stake. Despite all this selling pressure, Chipotle went on to have an extremely successful IPO. Before going public, Chipotle actually raised their IPO price twice. But even with that, Chipotle ended up rocketing 100% during their first day as a public company. This made Chipotle the second best restaurant IPO since the dot-com crash. This strong support from investors made it seem like Chipotle would have a smooth time even without McDonald's. But almost immediately, you could see the consequences. Just 2 years after McDonald's left, Chipotle would have their first notable health crisis in March of 2008. A Chipotle location in La Mesa, California would be linked to 22 cases of hepatitis A. Just 1 month later, Chipotle would have yet another outbreak. This time, the disease was norovirus and it ended up infecting 440 people. So, what in the world happened within these 24 months? Well, one of the most notable points was Chipotle's trend towards decentralization. I don't think you'd be surprised to hear that McDonald's was a strong proponent of centralized operations. Virtually all of their ingredients come from mass distributors like Keystone Foods. Every year, Keystone Foods alone delivers 150 million pounds of beef, 300 million pounds of chicken, and 15 million pounds of fish to McDonald's. While this style of supply chain raises a lot of questions regarding animal treatment, preservatives, and GMOs, one thing that's not in question is consistency. When all of your food comes from one location, it's all gonna be the same. More importantly though, a simplified supply chain makes it easier to maintain quality and identify issues quickly. Given that much of Chipotle's entire brand is built around simplicity, you would think that Steve would stick to a centralized supply chain, but he actually had other plans. You see, Steve had caught sense of a larger food trend which pushed people to ditch junk food and eat healthier. Being an opportunistic businessman, Steve decided to jump onto this trend of producing quote-unquote organic, locally sourced food. Looking back, this was a perfect choice in terms of their marketing and the branding, and it's also the ethical choice. This turned out to be a nightmare in terms of quality control. Today, Chipotle tries to source as many ingredients as possible from within a 350-mile radius. While this locally grown produce idea sounds great on paper, there is a reason that mega food corporations shy away from this idea. It's because it's virtually impossible to maintain standards across thousands of suppliers, and Chipotle would figure this out the hard way. This decentralized supply chain also put a lot of strain on Chipotle stores because their stores were built to operate in the exact opposite manner, with simplicity. Chipotle locations don't have any freezers, microwaves, or even can openers. This means that the staff have to take on a lot of responsibility when it comes to preparing the food. Given that it's a restaurant, you would think that this would be a given, but it's not. Most fast food places structure their business such that fast food workers don't have to do much preparation. Basically, everything comes pre-made, meaning that the workers simply have to heat up the food or assemble it. Chipotle workers, on the other hand, are literally given raw ingredients. I mean, they literally make the food in front of you. This would be okay if we were talking about an actual sit-down restaurant filled with experienced staff. But most Chipotle locations are run by young adults and high school students, so there is a massive learning curve. In 2015 and 2016, during the worst of Chipotle's outbreaks, Chipotle actually spent a lot of effort on strengthening their training programs. But this quickly led them to yet another issue: employee turnover. Just as employees start to get the hang of things, they leave. In 2021, Chipotle's turnover rate was 194%. This means that the average employee barely sticks around for 4 months, which is not that surprising given that it's a near minimum wage job. Chipotle has tried to combat this by handing out cash and stock bonuses, offering maternity/paternity coverage, and even offering life insurance and short-term disability. But none of this can change the fundamental fact that, in the end, it's still a fast food job. And this is really the story of Chipotle as a whole. They're trying to do all these great things like sourcing local food and promoting healthier options. But they're still a fast food place, and they have to deal with all of the limitations that come along with that. And these issues are only made worse by seemingly negligent leadership. While Steve started Chipotle with a great passion for food, it seems that over the years, he has become much more interested in the money. In fact, Chipotle is infamous for paying their executives ridiculous sums of money. Back in the early 2010s, Chipotle paid out $300 million to their co-CEOs. These guys were earning FANG CEO-type salaries, even though Chipotle was pulling in less than 1% of the revenue of companies like Apple or Google. Not to mention, their profit margins were way lower as well. Shareholders did eventually put their foot down and refuse to approve such compensation packages. But this just goes to show where the executives' priorities really were. Considering all this, why in the world do people continue to eat at Chipotle? Well, the answer is simple. As this Quora user puts it, Chipotle actually serves real food, or at least realer food than other fast food joints. Real food comes with real flavors that create a unique appeal, but they also come with real risk. The only way to avoid this risk is to cook yourself, spend a fortune on eating out, or eat highly processed bland foods. And given that most people are 1. Too lazy to cook themselves, 2. Not rich enough to eat out at 5-star restaurants regularly, and 3. Want something more than McDonald's or Burger King junk, they flock to something in the middle, which just so happens to be Chipotle. So Chipotle's greatest strength is also their biggest weakness, and they only have 2 options moving forward. They can re-centralize like the legacy competition, or they can try to fix what they already have. It's clear which side Chipotle has chosen, and looking at their fundamentals, it's working out just fine. Are you a fan of Chipotle? Comment that down below. Also, drop a like if you're a fan of real food. And of course, consider checking out our Discord community to suggest future video ideas, and consider subscribing to see more questions logically answered. Until then, I'm Hari, and I'll see you guys on the next one.